Sign it, he said, sliding the papers across the birthday cake I hadn't even touched yet. I already talked to a lawyer. It's fair. I looked down at the document, then back up at my husband of 9 years. The candles on the cake were still burning. I smiled. Okay, I said. Hand me a pen. His face did something strange. Relief mixed with confusion, like he'd been bracing for a fight and didn't know what to do with his hands now that there was none. My mother-in-law, sitting at the end of the table, made a small sound in her throat. My sister-in-law stopped chewing. The entire dinner party, the one my husband had insisted we host, the one I'd spent 2 days cooking for, went completely silent. I signed my name on every page he pointed to, calmly, deliberately, like I was signing a lease on an apartment I'd been waiting months to move into. Because in a way, I was. My name is Meredith. I'm 34 years old, and I have a master's degree in accounting that my husband didn't know I finished. I drive a 5-year-old Honda Civic with a cracked dashboard. I make my own cold brew every morning, and for the last 2 years, I have been the silent minority shareholder of the company my husband built, the one he thought was entirely his. I need to back up. My husband's name is Trevor. We met when I was 23 and he was 27 at a networking event in downtown Chicago that I almost didn't go to because my roommate convinced me at the last minute. He was charming in the way that certain men are charming when they're on their way up, full of plans, full of energy, full of a particular kind of attention that makes you feel like the only person in the room. We dated for 2 years, got married, moved to the suburbs. I got pregnant with our daughter 8 months after the wedding. I want to be fair. The first few years were good. Not perfect. Nothing is, but genuinely good. We were building something. I went part-time at my accounting firm when our daughter was born. Then part-time turned into barely working at all because someone had to take the 2 a.m. calls and pack the daycare bag and schedule the pediatrician appointments, and Trevor was always just about to close a deal. His logistics company was growing fast. He needed to focus. So I focused on everything else. By the time our daughter Hazel, who was 3 at the time, started preschool, I had quietly become the person who ran the household, managed the finances, raised the child, maintained the social calendar, handled every crisis large and small, and occasionally made the kind of observations about Trevor's business that he would later repeat to his partners as his own ideas. He never said thank you for any of it, not once. Not in a way that meant something. I kept telling myself it was fine, that this was just how it worked when one person built a business, that it was temporary, that once the company hit a certain revenue threshold, everything would even out. But it didn't even out. It got lonelier. I remember the exact night I stopped pretending. Hazel was 4. It was a Tuesday, raining hard outside, the kind of rain that sounds like static. She'd had a nightmare and come into our room at 2 a.m, and I'd carried her back to bed and stayed with her until she fell asleep, then gone down to the kitchen because I couldn't get back to sleep myself. I stood at the counter in the dark with a glass of water and I thought, I don't know what I'm staying for. Not anger, not even sadness really, just a quiet, clear-eyed observation. Like noticing a leak in the ceiling you've been ignoring for so long, you've started to think it's just part of the house. I didn't do anything dramatic. I didn't confront him. I didn't make any announcements. I enrolled in an online accounting program to finish my master's. I started paying very close attention. Trevor's company, Summit Logistics Solutions, had been growing at a pace that impressed people at dinner parties. By year 6 of our marriage, he had 43 employees, a client roster that included 2 mid-sized regional distributors, and a reputation in our city's business community as a self-made success. He loved telling the story of starting with nothing, a laptop and a rented desk space and sheer determination. The story was true mostly. What it omitted was the $40,000 from my parents that got him through the first 8 months, money I'd asked them for on his behalf and money he'd never once mentioned publicly. I had been a signatory on the original business account. I knew the company's financials the way I knew our grocery budget. Not because he shared them with me, but because for the first 3 years I had managed the QuickBooks account, filed the quarterly estimated taxes, organized the records for the CPA. I only stepped back when he hired a full-time office manager and made it clear, without quite saying so, that he didn't need me involved anymore. But I had learned a lot in those 3 years. I knew which investors he brought in. I knew the cap table, or at least what it had looked like before he started restructuring things. And 2 years before my birthday dinner, when a former business associate of Trevor's reached out to me, quietly, through a mutual contact about a secondary share sale, I listened. The associate, a man named Douglas who had co-founded Summit with Trevor and later been bought out, had retained a small equity stake. He was moving to Portugal, liquidating assets, and wanted a clean exit from anything tied to Summit. He wasn't supposed to sell to just anyone. There were right of first refusal clauses. But the buyout agreement had been sloppily drafted and his attorney had found a narrow window. I used the money from an inheritance my grandmother had left me. The inheritance I had never told Trevor about because the account was in my name alone and he had never thought to ask. I paid $135,000 for a 7.4% stake in my husband's company. I didn't tell anyone, not my sister, not my parents, not my best friend from college who I tell almost everything to. The only person who knew was my attorney, a woman named, I'll call her my lawyer, who I had hired 6 months earlier to review our prenuptial agreement, which, as it turned out, had several provisions that would matter enormously in the coming year. I finished my master's degree on a Thursday morning, submitted my final project from the kitchen table while Hazel was at school, closed my laptop, and made myself a cup of coffee. I sat with it for a long time. I didn't feel victorious exactly. I felt ready. My 34th birthday fell on a Saturday. Trevor had suggested hosting a dinner. His parents, his sister and her husband, 2 couples we'd been friends with for years. I cooked all day, a standing rib roast, roasted vegetables, a salad with pears and candied walnuts, a chocolate layer cake from a recipe my grandmother used to make. I set the table with the good dishes. I opened a nice bottle of wine. I was in a yellow dress I'd bought 6 months earlier and kept in the back of the closet, waiting. I knew something was coming. I'd known for weeks, actually. Trevor had been distracted in the specific way people get distracted when they're rehearsing a conversation in their head. He'd been sleeping on his phone, locking his car earlier than he needed to, coming home smelling like a different version of himself. I didn't have proof. I didn't need it. After 9 years, I knew his tells. The way you know the creaks in an old house. Dinner was pleasant enough on the surface. His mother complimented the roast. His father asked Hazel about 2nd grade, and she told him about a project she was doing on the solar system, very seriously, the way she does everything. The other couples talked about a renovation one of them was doing, a trip someone was planning, normal dinner party conversation. I smiled and refilled glasses and answered questions and watched my husband not look at me. After dessert, after his parents had helped clear the plates and his sister had taken Hazel upstairs to watch something on the iPad, Trevor reached under the table and pulled out a manila envelope. I think we both know things haven't been good for a while, he said. He said it to the centerpiece, mostly. I had my attorney draw this up. I think it's fair. Equal custody, we keep what's ours separately. He slid the envelope across the table. His mother looked at her hands. His father looked at Trevor. No one looked at me. I opened the envelope and read the agreement. It was, as divorce agreements go, competent. He divided the assets in a way that looked balanced on paper. The house to me, a cash settlement. Hazel on a week-on-week schedule. What it did not account for, what his attorney clearly had no idea existed, was my equity position in Summit Logistics Solutions. I picked up the pen he'd set on the table. I'll sign this, I said, but I want you to understand something first. He finally looked at me. Your company's cap table, I said, currently lists me as holding 7.4% of Summit's outstanding shares. Has been for about 2 years. You'll want your attorney to know that before you file, because any sale, merger, or major financing event will require my signature. I set the signed agreement down on the table. I'm not trying to take anything from you. I just need you to know what the board of your company looks like right now. The room was very quiet. Trevor's father said slowly, "What?" Trevor's face had gone the color of the tablecloth. "Where did you?" He stopped. Started again. "How did you?" Douglas sold me his stake, I said. About 25 months ago, everything was properly filed with the state. Your attorney can verify it first thing Monday morning. His mother looked up then. She looked at me for a long moment, and her expression was something I hadn't expected. Not anger, not shock, exactly. Something closer to recognition. I stood up to check on Hazel. The next 3 months were, by any measure, the most clarifying of my life. Trevor's attorney called my attorney the following Tuesday. The conversation, as my attorney related, was notable for its brevity. The original divorce filing was withdrawn. Trevor wanted to renegotiate. His position had changed, she said, with a dryness I genuinely appreciated. My attorney said she'd be in touch. I want to be honest about something. The equity wasn't leverage in the way I'd originally imagined, back when I first bought it. I hadn't sat across from Douglas with some elaborate plan in mind. I had bought it because it seemed financially sound, because I understood the business, and because something in me, the part of me that had been running a household and quietly doing the math on our lives for years, knew that I needed to have something that was mine, something he couldn't overlook or reframe or take credit for. That it became relevant at all was almost beside the point. What I actually wanted was straightforward. I wanted the house, because Hazel's school was 4 minutes away and she'd had the same best friend since kindergarten and I was not uprooting her life. I wanted a fair split of assets, including Trevor's company valuation, which had grown considerably and which was now, thanks to my share, partially mine by any legal standard. I wanted a custody arrangement that reflected actual reality, meaning the parent who had been present for every school drop-off and every sick day and every bedtime for 7 years should not be treated as equivalent to the parent who had been, in many of those moments, on a conference call. My attorney was excellent. The settlement took 11 weeks. Trevor fought on some points and conceded on others. In the end, I got the house with a buyout of his equity. I got a settlement that accounted for my contribution to the growth of his business during the years I'd worked inside it. I got primary residential custody of Hazel, with Trevor having her every other week and every other holiday, and a very clear communication protocol that my attorney was firm about. I sold my Summit shares back to the company as part of the settlement, at a valuation that more than tripled what I'd paid Douglas. I will not write out the number in numerals because, from what I understand, certain voice software doesn't handle it gracefully. What I will say is that when my attorney emailed me the final figures, I sat in my kitchen, alone, and I cried. Not because I was sad, but because for the first time in a very long time, I understood that I had not lost those years. I had been building the whole time. I just hadn't known exactly what I was building toward. I went back to work full-time in March. A mid-size accounting firm in the city, the kind of place that values people who understand both the numbers and the humans behind them. My commute is 40 minutes on the metro, which I have come to genuinely love. The lake on the left on clear mornings, the coffee from the station, the 40 minutes of reading or thinking that belong entirely to me. Hazel is 8 now. She's finishing up a year of 2nd grade and is very serious about a book series involving a detective mouse. She comes home from Trevor's on Sunday evenings and usually wants to tell me everything about her week in one breath, standing in the kitchen while I make dinner, and I stop whatever I'm doing to listen. Trevor and I are civil. That's the right word for it, civil. Not warm, not hostile, civil. We communicate about Hazel through an app that logs everything, which was my attorney's suggestion and which I have found enormously useful for keeping my peace of mind. He is, to his credit, more present now than he was during the marriage. Maybe responsibility clarifies things. Maybe having Hazel 50% of the time made him realize how much he'd been missing. I don't know. I try not to speculate. His mother texts me sometimes. Not often, but sometimes, on Hazel's birthday, on the first day of school, occasionally just to say she was thinking of me. I text her back. She is not a simple person, but she is a person who has surprised me, and I have found that I am more willing now than I used to be to make room for people who surprise me. My own mother asked me, some months after everything was finalized, if I was angry. We were on the phone, and I had to think about it for a minute. I think I was, I said, for a long time. I just didn't let myself feel it because I was too busy making sure everything kept running. Are you angry now? I thought about the morning the settlement was signed. I thought about the train, the lake, The chocolate layer cake recipe that I still make every year, because Hazel loves it and because I made it first and it belongs to me now in a way that has nothing to do with him. No, I said, not anymore. And that was the truth. People ask me sometimes, friends mostly, women I know who sensed something was happening long before I said anything, how I knew what to do, how I had the foresight, how I managed to stay so calm. I don't have a clean answer. I didn't have a plan exactly, at least not at first. I had a feeling. The kind of feeling you get when you've been paying attention for long enough that you start to understand the pattern. I went back to school because I wanted something that was mine. I bought those shares because they made financial sense and because some part of me was done being invisible in a company I'd helped keep alive. I stayed quiet because I had learned over years of keeping a household running that the person who panics loses information. And I kept showing up for Hazel, for the dinners, for the birthday party I spent 2 days cooking, because that was who I was, and I wasn't going to let the worst version of my marriage turn me into someone else. The birthday candles burned down while he was talking. Nobody blew them out. I think about that sometimes. All that wax melting onto the frosting of a cake I made myself, in a kitchen I kept for years, in a house that is mine now and has always been mine in the ways that matter most. I think it's okay that they burned all the way down. Some things need to finish on their own before you can move on. The birthday candles burned all the way down while Trevor was still talking. I think about that image more than I expected to. There's something I've come to understand about the years I spent feeling invisible in that house. They weren't wasted. Every morning I packed Hazel's lunch and tracked Trevor's accounts and filed quarterly taxes for a company that stopped acknowledging me. I was learning something. I was paying attention. And attention, it turns out, is one of the most quietly powerful things a person can accumulate. People sometimes frame stories like mine as revenge. I understand why. But when I'm honest with myself, what I actually felt when I signed those papers was not triumph over Trevor. It was something simpler and harder to name. The feeling of a woman who finally stopped waiting for someone else to recognize her worth and decided to recognize it herself. That's the thing about integrity, the real kind, not the performative kind. It doesn't announce itself. It just keeps showing up. It keeps doing the work even when no one is watching, even when no one says thank you, even when the person sitting across from you at dinner has already decided your background furniture. I kept doing the work. I enrolled in that program. I read the cap table documents. I made the call to Douglas, not because I was plotting anything, but because I refused to let years of effort disappear into someone else's success story. The intelligence part, and I mean that not as a compliment to myself, but as something I had to consciously develop, was learning to stop reacting emotionally in real time and start thinking in longer arcs. Trevor made his calculations based on who he thought I was in year 2 of our marriage. He didn't update his model. I updated mine constantly. I read. I asked questions. I hired an attorney before I needed one. I understood our finances better than he did by the time he slid that envelope across my birthday table. That gap didn't happen by accident. And then there's the part that doesn't get talked about enough, the sheer endurance of it. Staying steady through years of feeling unseen. Finishing a master's degree at the kitchen table after bedtime. Not saying anything too early. Not moving too fast. Not letting the loneliness or the frustration push me into a reaction that would cost me later. That kind of patience isn't passive. It is the hardest act of work I have ever done. Hazel asked me once, a few months after everything settled, if I was sad about the divorce. We were in the car, coming home from her soccer practice, and she asked it the way kids ask things, directly, without softening it. I thought about it for a moment before I answered. I was sad for a long time before the divorce, I told her. The divorce was just when things started getting better. She nodded like that made complete sense. Maybe it did. What I know now is that the life I'm living, the metro commute, the cold brew, the Saturday mornings when Hazel tells me everything in one breath while I'm making eggs, this life did not happen to me. I built it. Quietly, over years, in the margins of a life someone else was directing. And when the moment came, I was ready. That's all any of us can really do, I think. Stay honest, stay curious, stay standing. The candles burned down. And then I blew out what was left, cut the cake, and we all went home.